Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Glen Castro again. How we doing?
Hey, how's it going, Manny? All good, all good. Thank you for taking the time.
No, it's all good. I know this was back and forth for a while. Both parties, you're very busy with the UFC PI, some personal stuff on my end, but I'm glad that we were back in. Again, we have filmed the previous episode, so if people want to watch that, please go back because there's a lot of really good information on that. But to start us off, what originally got you interested in nutrition and how has it sort of progressed from there?
Yeah. So nutrition as a combat sport athlete myself has always been something that's been at the tip of the spear, if you will, from what I can improve in order to perform better, right? In many sports, nutrition is already going to be a pretty critical component. But in particular, when you have to make weight, right, trying to have the most optimal body composition and also to a certain degree do or execute a healthy and proper weight cut is such an advantage. So just looking as to how I can improve that. I remember when I was, in high school, just, eating the typical chicken breast, broccoli, rice diet and wasn't necessarily the most sound. Now looking back, wasn't probably the most sound or creative or effective way of eating healthily, but at least the seed was planted. So fast forward to my undergrad, decided to major in nutrition. I was wrestling in college over in St. John's University in Minnesota, and then I realized that there was a actual certification, that you can go ahead and have a degree in nutrition as a nutrition expert, and decided to pursue that. And then next thing you know, I'm working in a hospital during COVID, and from there on out, decided to go ahead and finally go back to sports, doing a fellowship at the UFC PI, and next thing you know, I'm there full time. So a little bit of a long-winded answer as to how I got into nutrition, but there's how it also ended, or where I'm
Perfect.
at now.
And what currently gets you fired up in your role?
Many things can be fired up in my role, but I think at this stage probably how to optimize recovery and how to be the most efficient, right, when trying to set the stage for a recovery and how nutrition can impact that. MMA is such a demanding sport, both physically and mentally, that the ramifications of both of those effects end up having the more obvious impact is going to be the physical, right, impact that it has on recovery. Also, the psychological component. Remember my sleep, stress, not being able to focus during training, etc. All of a sudden, you're not drilling the moves right. All these different things have an effect. So that's something that me personally, I'm quite interested at the moment.
Nice. Again, one of the things that we were about to get to on the last podcast that we never had time for is that tissue health and how, again, we often talk about how S&C PTs are kind of the similar job, but we're on two different sides of the spectrum. And in the lobby, we're talking about like where do we meet in the middle, and often does come to that nutrition part and how we can help speed up the process so the S&C players can come in and do their job. How are you assessing like what is tissue health? How are you planning for it, and what are some stages that you use to get your athletes to the better spot?
Absolutely. One of the best things about the UFC PI is that everybody's so good at what they do, when it comes to really diagnosing soft tissue injury and managing it. Right. So it makes our job easy because we have protocols that we can implement from a supplement standpoint that are simply based off of just having interdisciplinary, communication. Right. So if I'm speaking to somebody from sports medicine and then they let us know that the ex athlete has a meniscus tear or ACL tear or whatnot, whether it be grade one all the way through, the full thing, we can start, to a certain degree, it can be a little bit more black and white for us, right? I'm sure for sportsmen, for S&C, it's a lot more complicated. But from our end, we can go and pull out all the stops. Now, all the stops are going to be, the very traditional supplement interventions, which are going to include collagen, right? We actually have two forms of collagen that we offer our athletes, one powdered and one gel, which is going to add a little bit of convenience. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because MMA athletes are quite busy and always on the go. Obviously, if you have a soft tissue injury in your lower extremities, probably not going to be much on the go. But for those that have a soft tissue injury in the upper extremities, something that can, help them just kind of not think as much. The gels are going to be a fantastic option, but that along with vitamin C, which has been shown to help the absorption of the collagen into the actual soft tissue which is injured, is gonna help tremendously. But in addition to that, will also help with inflammation and anti-inflammatory agents. So we have a supplement called curcumin phytosome, which is curcumin in a form that is a lot more readily absorbed. And in addition to this, other anti-inflammatories such as omega-3s. We have a supplement by Thorne called Super EPA,
Shout to
which
Thorn,
has
unreal company.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Thorne is fantastic, right? And not just from a quality standpoint, but also from a third party
Testing.
certification standpoint. So it makes our job super easy. But yeah, trying to set the stage in terms of providing the nutrients that are required to go ahead and heal the injury in question, but also help out the inflammation that is associated with such injuries by providing some anti-inflammatories. On top of that, food is always going to be first, right?
Hmm.
So trying to make sure that they're still consuming a pretty well-rounded diet, depending on what extremity, where the soft tissue injury is. Calories may be, calorie burn may be a concern, may not be a concern. They may still be competing, they may not be competing anymore. All this will determine whether or not we have to go ahead and provide a diet to meet a certain benchmark, improve body composition, or prevent the excessive weight gain that is at times associated with injuries that immobilize you.
100%. And you've actually given us a lot, and I kind of want to touch back to the collagen piece that you've just spoken about. Obviously, there is some misconceptions with collagen, and it's just like a skin tightener and a beauty product type supplement. How are you using it at the PI, and how do you explain the differences between actually this is really good for your tissue health as opposed to just like because it's also not like a very spoken about supplement.
Yeah. Yeah. Typically, so a lot of the research that has been done in terms of the actual benefits of collagen for soft tissue injury comes from bovine collagen. So,
Mm.
you know, the alternative is going to be marine, right? So the way that I always phrase this, because sometimes this question comes up and sometimes supplements are marketed as this collagen is
Hmm.
for soft tissue injury and this collagen is to make sure that your skin is nice and healthy and bright and all of these different things. But ultimately, most of the research has been done on bovine collagen. So sticking to that, I think is the best course of action if you want to go ahead and if you're looking to help out a soft tissue injury. Now, the dosage that is pretty well documented is 15 grams, per day and taken particularly right before a rehab session that's targeting the affected area and consuming it with vitamin C will go ahead and ensure that the absorption is adequate.
Nice. And with that inflammatory part that you were talking about, this is something that I've been trying to get into a little bit, and it's something I spoke with Heather about, and it's that thing of like, is all inflammation bad, and how to determine whether it's bad or good, and what is your course of action from then on.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And it's really interesting because I think if inflammation was bad, it wouldn't be happening, right? And ultimately, if we look back and think about we're mostly water, right? The reason why we're mostly water is because a lot of the chemical reactions that take place need water to go ahead and be conducted, right? That's the medium in which it is conducted. Now, in inflammation, right, what's going to happen is that there's a lot more fluid around that affected area so that there can be a lot of, fixing of the issue at hand. Now, that is all great, but when you have an athlete who, has a grade 1 or grade 2 injury, right, and has a fight in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, at times the natural inflammation needs to be addressed so that they can have full range of motion. They can walk on the knee if that's affected in this case. Let's say, for example, so that they can go ahead and actually compete effectively and actually be able to have a chance of having a positive outcomes. Sometimes, dealing with that inflammation directly with supplements and negating that inflammation that is of course naturally occurring, doesn't hurt at all. Now, there are also going to be cascaded events associated with the inflammation markers that are going to be elevated, right? That not only just affect the injury at hand, but also going to other parts of the body, right? And that's, I mean, it manifests in so many different ways, right? It can disrupt sleep, it can disrupt recovery just from all the other, there's so much energy being used into just that area. So sometimes from our ends, right? Okay, we know that this athlete is in an inflammatory state currently. Well, we may have to add a little bit more calories. Obviously, with collagen supplementation, we'll go ahead and, help the injury that is in question. But in addition to that, why not provide some anti-inflammatory, especially if this individual has a fight coming up and ultimately it wasn't something that they cannot completely
Heal from.
not yeah, fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's interesting you say that, because one of the things that me and Heather spoke about was the fact that some athletes are dependent on this fight to, again, make mortgage payments, make just their family take through to the next month or next fight. So something that we spoke about was how a lot of the athletes may come in with injuries already. So it's kind of Heather's job to pad everything else to support them to keep fighting. What are some things that you do with them that kind of aids in that role of padding them to make sure that they can keep going and fighting for it?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because ultimately, I think we have to work backwards a little bit to, identify what is that causes the injuries, right? And how is the stage set for injuries? Now, there's always going to be injuries, no matter how well fueled you are, no matter how well nourished you are, how good your nutrition is. Ultimately, if you get caught in an armbar, no matter how much collagen, protein, calories you're consuming, if you don't tap, you'll have an injury, right? Now, with that being said, well, let's talk about what can go ahead and increase the risk of injuries, right? So, improper nutrition. And what would improper nutrition in a weight class sport be? Well, we know that all these athletes most athletes have to go ahead and engage in a weight descent, which involves a calorie restriction. And during that calorie restriction, at the end, as they get closer, they engage in what we like to call acute weight loss, right? It's a voluntary dehydration stage to go ahead and briefly meet a weight, right? Weight limit so that they can go ahead and compete at that weight class. Now, in this whole process, right? What happens sometimes is that athletes may cramp for the test, right? So if you are in a very, very low energy availability, which oftentimes can be, easily defined as 30 kcals per fat-free mass, right? Kilograms of fat-free mass. If you're below that, you're increasing the risk of injury. In addition to that, not supplementing with multivitamins, particularly in this sport, you're not going to be giving the ammunition from a micronutrient standpoint that is necessitated to go ahead and execute all of these, chemical reactions that are going to support recovery, right? So that's another thing. Now, in the event that, let's say, you're not, even if you're in an isocaloric diet, right? So you're still consuming enough calories, not changing weight. Let's say that you are, you're only 6 pounds above the weight class or whatnot, and you don't really need to lose weight because you can just dehydrate yourself, assuming that you know your body and that's the thing that you want to do. If you already just drop carbs individually, there's actually research that can actually cause symptoms of what's called red S, right? So that's going to go ahead and cause a lot of issues, increase the risk of injury. So covering all these bases from a nutrition standpoint first ensures that the athlete is best set up for success. And some of these things sound pretty obvious, but the issue comes once again when, hey, my weight is fine. I've done this before, and it's no problem because I didn't get injured last time, so I'm just gonna go ahead and go into a crazy weight descent, instead of losing, what my coach told me or my nutritionist told me of, zero point 0.8 kgs per week. I know I can lose 1.5 kgs per week, so I'm used to it, and it depends from weight class to weight class, but it just takes that one time when you're really, really tired. All of a sudden, you're pushing really hard in camp, and the nutrition is really not fueling you enough to go ahead and support the demand that is needed to execute the technique appropriately, which inadvertently can go and lead into injury. And this compounds, right? Because then
Hmm.
all of a sudden you're not eating enough to go ahead and get good sleep, right? Like carbohydrates have a direct impact on how deep of sleep you get. And we almost like to call this as forfeiting. So the more that you procrastinate, right, on that weight descent, you forfeit proper recovery, you forfeit proper sleep, you forfeit the ability to, have cognitive ability, right? You forfeit, brain health supplements that can go ahead and that may retain water, such as creatine, right? So all these different things that set the stage for a proper weight descent so that you can be as best prepared and have an execute a great weight cut, all of a sudden become a little bit more compromised. Now you start getting injuries. Now you start, getting sick. Now you start getting these infections that ultimately end up going to sports med.
Yeah. You've also just mentioned nutrition and cognitive. What are some of the impacts through a lack of nutrition?
Yeah, it's going to be a cycle, right? Not having the ability to focus. And one of the things that I like to mention to the athletes that we work with is in trying to lose too much weight or not having the proper nutrition, right? Even if you're not losing that much weight, like I said, if you're not consuming enough carbohydrates, you probably won't have as optimal of a cognitive ability. How does that manifest? What effect does that have on your training camp? Well, all of a sudden you're not focused when you need to game plan for an opponent, right? All of a sudden you don't have the energy to go ahead and spar the way that you're going to compete, right? And coaches, they take how the athletes come in the nourished state that they come in, and they assume that that's the athlete that's going to step into the
Mm.
cage, right? So then the game plan ends up being revolving around that state of the athlete. When if the athlete wasn't appropriately nourished, then there was maybe some missed opportunities because come fight day, they're going to be appropriately nourished. Or you can actually flip it around, right? Where it's like the athlete decided to do most of their camp very well nourished and did not lose much weight. So the coach thought that, okay, this is the athlete that I'm going to get come fight night. And what ends up happening is they have a massive weight cut that is really, really draining. And then they don't perform the way that they did the whole fight camp. And it's like, what happened? Right? But two sides to the coin.
Yeah. You've kind of just teeter-tottered between pre, during, and post. And I kind of want to touch back on that a little bit. Um, Obviously, your advice pre fight is going to be different because they are wanting to either make that weight or um, reduce enough to make that weight. And then I know that the weigh in typically happens for you guys, anyways, 24 hours before. And then they've got that sort of time to recover in between. And then after is a whole different ball game. But during that weigh-in time to the time that they fight, what are you sort of implementing into their plans that make sure that their weight is back up, their hydration is back up in a form that's not depleting sources and making them worse?
So just to clarify, between weigh-ins and the time that they step into the cage, what are the interventions that we provide?
Yeah.
Yep. So obviously, once they weigh in, they've already engaged in this acute dehydration process, right? Which allowed them to make weight for a brief period of time. Now the goal is to go ahead and get them back to the state that they were during fight camp, right? All the techniques that they drilled, all the techniques that they trained to make sure that they are as close as possible to that. Now, how do we get them there? Well, first of all, we want to replace what's been lost, right? And the most obvious one is going to be replacing fluid, right? Along with that, no way around it, electrolytes, right? In particular sodium, to make sure that that is balanced. And the body does a pretty good job at tightly regulating the blood sodium concentrations of serum sodium. However, we still want to be cognizant, right, about the fact that even though it's pretty well regulated, the blood volume overall is probably going to be lower depending on how much you cut as well, right? Simply by the fact that you just have less water in your body. So we provide a hypotonic solution in which we provide for all the athletes to make sure that we're not affecting the concentration of the sodium in the blood, right? If we were to go and provide, I mean, this is the reason why you can't drink salt water, right? Because it's way too concentrated with salts. And It would just, you wouldn't be able to process it too well. Now, in addition to that, the other thing that's been depleted at this point, strategically actually, has been glycogen. Now, the same way that we discussed earlier, glycogen, carbohydrates, not only going to ensure that you have focus, but that you can actually do your techniques the right way, have power, have endurance, etc., all these different things. Such a critical performance nutrient. So we'll go ahead and replace that by providing soft and tolerable, simple carbohydrates, which is in an amount that is consistent with carbohydrate loading. Now, we do only have 24 hours to 36 hours to go ahead and get this done. So the other thing that we'll emphasize to the athletes is trying to stay away from nutrients that are going to be slowing down the digestion of the performance nutrients, right? So sodium, fluid, carbohydrates. So trying to minimize or not emphasize fats, and most definitely, reducing the amount of fiber that is consumed helps tremendously in this process.
Yeah. And then obviously after fight, they've just went to war for however long their rounds last. Was some recovery that you implement as soon as they're done, or the time leading up to that?
Yeah, so as soon as they're done, they actually receive a supplement called Cinequil Plus, which I'm sure Olivia and Heather have discussed, which is going to be brain health supplement. And to not dive too deep into that, essentially it's a multivitamin for the brain, right? So it's going to include a lot of, once again, anti-inflammatory agents, in addition to ketone bodies. And in the event that an athlete were to have a concussion, right, in which an energy crisis is occurring, carbohydrate utilization by the brain was actually downregulated. So by substituting the energy fuel that the brain ends up using with ketones, the brain can go ahead and speed up that recovery process, secondary to getting in a fist fight, right? So in addition to this, we'll also support the gut-brain axis by providing probiotics and also omega-3s, super EPA, like I mentioned. But then, once again, emphasizing that sleep by providing melatonin, in which at times, after a fight, whether it be just due to a concussion or due to just the pain of being in a
In a
fight,
fight?
exactly, can help, right? So we still try and prioritize a lot of those key priorities, for lack of a better term, even after the fight. If they actually have a concussion that's been diagnosed, that'll get flagged by sports medicine, and we actually send them more heavier duty supplement protocol that addresses a concussion or a TBI in further.
Again, it's something that I'm aware that happens. Like, obviously mixed martial arts is many sports in one. Again, S&C deals with it a certain way, PTs deal with it a certain way. What are some differences in between what happens in their training to what happens in your role to deal with the demands of the different sort of sport elements that happen within mixed martial arts?
That's a fantastic question, and I love it because I think that's what makes the nutrition in this sport in particular a lot different. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I'm working with an athlete A who is a grappler, right? And I'm working with athlete B who is a striker. Or let's say, actually, I'm sorry, working with an athlete, right? And one camp, they're fighting a grappler. The other camp, they're fighting a striker, right? And this athlete just comes from a freestyle background. So all they've done is MMA. They didn't really come from any background. The type of training that they will do, right, which will be handled by their coaches, will dictate actually what kind of diet we end up putting them on. If they're going to be doing a lot more, wrestling because they're facing a wrestler, one of the things, that we can start focusing on is, within safe limits, within safe range, maybe coming a little bit heavier and trying to have a little bit more fat-free mass so that they can hang with the, with the very grueling, strength nature of a wrestler, right? It's not, I feel really silly right now. I'm forgetting the term, but it's not going to be necessarily explosive movements as much as it's going to be more just static.
Yeah.
Right. So,
sorry to interrupt. Is that so you've got a little bit more storage reserves to deal with the heaviness and the constant need for that, we'll say like fat energy source usage?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be super glycolytic in nature, right? Because you're just going to be, trying to defend sprawls, and if you're getting in exchanges with a wrestler, it's very, very high paced. But also, when somebody is grappling you, and you have to go ahead and counteract the static strength output of the wrestler that is on top of you, right? You definitely need quite a bit of glycogen, a lot of fat-free mass, right, to go and keep up with that. Obviously, endurance should still be trained in that case, but I defer to our S&C team for that. But that's more the thought behind it.
Yeah. No, that's interesting because obviously it's not something that you normally think of that your nutrition will impact who you have coming up. Is there any other sort of things that people don't normally consider that nutrition plays a big role in?
Yeah, well, I mean, flipping it on its head, if the same athlete, is facing a striker and they're like, hey, I'm probably going to strike a lot more. Um, okay, well, what are you going to be training? What kind of class are you going to be doing? Let's go and develop those energy systems, or at least provide the fuel needed to develop those energy systems. Would it be worth coming a little bit lighter if you're going to be fighting a striker so that you can go ahead and not feel as tired if you're bouncing around as much, right? Because in wrestling, whatever energy you use, your opponent ends up paying the price for it. It's not just you. Bouncing around, being a little bit heavier, and trying to, for lack of a better term, whether it be going for a knockout or trying to just outpoint somebody, you might be bouncing, moving a little bit more, being a little bit lighter, maybe more convenient. So, in that case, that athlete might come in a little bit lighter, but
Yeah.
that's the flip side of the coin.
Yeah, nice. And again, we've kind of previously touched on in the last episode, but the hydration impacts on like peripheral vision and how some of that can directly impact their energy levels. What is your hydration protocols? Obviously, they dehydrate before the weigh-ins, but then during the fight, the hydration has to be totally different to then meet with the demands of the rounds and leading up to that.
Yeah, the goal is to fully hydrate these athletes, right? 24 to 36 hours is plenty of time to go ahead and get them stabilized, right? And one of the things that I forgot to mention when discussing this is that we've actually done, plenty of we have plenty of data sets at this point, and really there is no benefit to coming in heavier, right? And it almost seems like the heavier that somebody comes, as long as it's above a 7% weight regain. So if
Mm.
somebody weighs 156 pounds, as long as on fight day they end up regaining 7% above that weight class, there really is you know, no benefit to come in heavier. And why do I bring that up? Because if an athlete thinks that cutting more weight is going to end up having a benefit, well, it seems like the more you cut, the more of an effect that dehydration ends up having and lasting. So, with that being said, the protocol is to rehydrate them fully, right, so that they can go ahead and be stable from that side of things. But the effects are going to differ depending on how much they ended up cutting weight. So, from a strategy standpoint, as mentioned, the goal is going to be to replace, all of the fluid that was lost, include carbohydrates in the solution so that they can go ahead and get rehydrated. But in addition, the electrolyte component, a lot of the food's going to be salted. That's going to be provided to go and provide extra electrolytes. And the solutions that we provide, as I mentioned, are hypotonic, are still going to include, it's going to be based off of how much they sweat in their actual weight cuts. And by multiplying that by the average amount of sodium that is in sweat, we can go ahead and reverse calculate how much they need. Now, some athletes will go and provide creatine to go ahead and expedite that hydration and glycogen restoration, but that is more on a case-by-case basis, as some athletes may have some sensitive guts, and if they haven't taken creatine before, maybe something new that we don't want to introduce right before their biggest fight of their life.
That's interesting as well, because if we're talking marathons and you start experimenting with gels, you're more likely to release yourself mid-race. Obviously, they're going to all out war. Is there anything that you completely avoid in that lead up to the fight to make sure that their stomachs are stable?
Yeah, on fight day, I always like to remind them that the hard work gets done the day before, right after weigh-in. So once you weigh in, there's still not necessarily a long road to recovery, but there's still a systematic approach that should be implemented in recovering. Once you get to fight day, the same principles apply: high carb, low fiber, low fat, moderate protein, high sodium, replacing fluids after the shakeout. But how do you like to feel when you spar, right? Do you like to have a full belly? Do you like to be completely, you know, feel like you're going in there fasted? Do you like to just have your stomach somewhere in the middle? How full do you like to be? Once you find that answer, we can start working as to when your last meal will be and what that last meal will be. Because sometimes athletes are like, "Oh, I didn't think about that. You know what? I actually kind of like being a little bit full. Like I like feeling a little bit like, like have something in there. Just what I've always done, it's what feels right to me." It's like, all right, cool. Then go ahead and bring some snacks into the arena, make sure they're sealed, and go and munch on that. But sometimes guys are like, you know what? I cannot train with anything in my system at all. I need to go in there completely fasted. Perfect. Last meal, 4 hours before your fight. After that, just water and Gatorade, and keep it quite simple.
Is there anything that obviously not everyone will use the PI resources? They'll have their own team coming in. How much, if any, do you advise on their protocols?
Like how many athletes in the roster do we work?
Yeah, because so the reason I'm asking is we've obviously followed each other for a while, so I
Hmm.
see like a little bit behind the scenes of what you do during the weigh-ins, the packets that you create for the athletes that weigh in.
Right.
Is everyone sort of taking full advantage of that, or do some still use their own stuff?
Yeah, it differs, right? I would say on an average fight card, I'd say we probably have about 98% engagement
That's
from
high.
athletes. Yeah, yeah, it's quite substantial. It's quite substantial. And, that engagement looks different from athlete to athlete. One athlete can be, have been engaged with one of the dietitians from the start of the camp all the way through the weigh-ins, all the way through the recovery process. Whereas another athlete, hey, my name is so and so. I don't really work with anybody. I just want your opinion. And then
Mm.
all of a sudden, we're full blown, helping them out with their nutrition. And some athletes have their own nutritionist, and they'll reach out and they'll be like, hey, Glenn, my athlete is over there, fighting in X card. Would you mind just, helping out? This is what I'm thinking about: macros, etc., recovery plan, and we'll go ahead and, facilitate that as well. And then some athletes are just like, hey, I got my guy, no worries. Just to keep everything a lot more organized, I'm just going to follow what he says, and then we'll just go from his recommendations. And honestly, at this point, I think a lot of the nutritionists that work with the athletes that we don't work with are so solid, and we've kind of developed a network at this point with
Mm.
a lot of them. And oftentimes it's like they're living in the other side of the world, and it's just what's more convenient, who they're more comfortable with. So many different components that go into the reasons behind that. But I'd say
Hmm.
about 98% of influence we have per fight card.
Nice. So this is something that I always use the UFC PI as the golden standard for this, and it's the collaboration and willingness to work and help everyone. Use are so like tight knit within the PI, so like use will bounce athletes from one person to the other. But hearing that you actually extend that into the private part of it, that's awesome to know as well. One thing that
Yeah.
sorry,
Oh, go ahead. No,
no,
I
you're
was,
good.
I was just gonna, I was just gonna say that. I mean, ultimately, I think everybody has good intentions, right? When it comes to helping athletes, and on the healthier that we can make this sport, the more that we can help these athletes. I think that's a win, not only for like our mission statement, right, but for these guys that put in so much effort
Mm.
into their daily routine, requires so much discipline, So I think it's a win-win overall. So, but yeah, appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. And again, been very fortunate, like early on the podcast, like Becky, Olivia, you came on, and like my exposure to what is good about this industry has been developed like very early on from you guys. So like I've always enjoyed speaking with you on just anything. Another kind of take I want to ask you on is, obviously, because you do have fighters from all over the world, nutrition, like food, just in general food, is going to look different and different requirements. Some will have Ramadan, some will just be Catholic, so they'll not eat certain types of food during the day, the week, the month. How do you keep track of it, first of all, and then how do you deal with all these different requirements?
Notes and
Notes.
research. I think, gosh, it sounds like I'm doing a work interview here, but approaching everything like a student. And what do I mean by that? You know, you got to be humble enough to know what you don't know, and that's almost the scariest thing out of everything. It's that you think you've turned the page in a subject that you like to think that you're quite proficient in, and then all of a sudden there's just a whole different world. You know, you pick up an athlete. That all of a sudden, you know, has certain restrictions, has certain condition, comes from a culture where they don't eat any of the food that you provide. And listen, myself being Mexican, you know, tacos and beans and rice, I mean, that'd be the easiest program, right, to
Mm-hmm.
make. But ultimately, working with somebody that may come from South America, just that is going to be a completely different diet. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some Argentinian fighters who have taught me so much about how much I don't know. And I think that's the beauty of culture and the things that we do, not to be too cliche, but learning about how I always joke around that the biggest takeaway that I've learned from Spanish language is that there's three different ways, three different meanings to tostada. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's a one meaning in Spain, and there's one meaning in Mexico, and there's, you know, another meaning in Argentina. It's just funny because it's all the same language, but just within one language, right? And I guess I don't want to call it culture because that's not the right term, but you know, so many different dishes, so many
Mm-hmm.
different foods just within that same common
Mm-hmm.
language that's spoken between all these different nations. So yeah, just learning, you know, doing research and yeah, approaching it with a humble
Yeah,
approach because ultimately you want to be as effective.
100%. With some of the more sort of demanding, no, demand is probably the wrong word, but some of the trickier ways that some cultures do, like we'll take Muslims for an example, is like with Ramadan, there is certain times of day that they can't eat, but they're still required to fight. What are some of your approaches to that where they are restricted to like eating before sunrise and post sunset?
Yeah. Once again, working backwards, right? What is a non-negotiable, right? And that from sunrise and sunset, no food, right? And no water, right? So from there, we can go ahead and work backwards. We need X amount of calories. This is just an example I said how something would be worked through, right? But we need X amount of calories, X amount of protein, these micronutrients, etc. Okay, what's going to be the game plan? Are you going to go ahead and sleep during the day? What time are you going to get up for prayer? Where in the world are you? And when is sunrise and when is
When
sundown?
sunset.
Sunset, yeah, yeah. So, what pockets of window can we work with? And it changes, right? Because some athletes may want to go ahead and, hey, I want to be up and I want to be awake and kind of go through this whole process. And whereas some athletes may want to go and sleep during the fasting period and just switch their whole schedule. I'm going to train at night.
Mm.
So it changes from, even with athletes engaging in Ramadan, it changes from athlete to athlete. But being, again, learning and touching base with them and trying to come up with a plan that's specific and tailored to them is the most critical component.
That's interesting as well. Because like I suppose it makes sense for them wanting to be asleep for as long as possible during that phase and then switching their schedules. And some of them will have the flexibility to do so. So that's quite an interesting take as well. What would be your approach to it then? If that is the case, are you ensuring that during the times that they are awake, so either end of the fast, you're implementing just like a normal nutritional plan?
Yeah, whatever the amount of weight that they need to lose and whatever the amount of calories that they would have consumed otherwise away from Ramadan, essentially spreading them out through the time periods that they're allowed to eat, right? And if there needs to be a strategic approach into, having more calorie dense meals or foods or snacks, then that is the best way to go. Now, sometimes things need to be sacrificed,
Mm.
and I think the trait of a good practitioner is, outlining the outcomes, potential consequences, right? Of, skipping out on, extra calories or once again, some opportunities to go ahead and maximize, nutrition, etc. But, again, trying to understand where the athlete is, right? And meet them where they're at
Mm.
is going to increase engagement and increase the effectiveness of the plan that you have in mind. Because if you just come in and this is what the book says, you need to have 2 grams per kg of body weight of protein, you need to have this amount of vitamin A or this amount of creatine, or
Per
else,
body kit,
you're
yeah.
doing everything. Yeah, that athlete may be like, thank you very much, but I'll find somebody else. Ultimately, what they value from all the way from their religion, culture, foods, family. There's so many different components that have an influence in engagement and effectiveness. So as a practitioner, I think you have to sometimes look at it from a
Mm.
bird's eye view and see what you take and what you don't.
What's your take on beetroot extract usage in sport? And then I'll
Yeah,
explain why I'm asking.
yeah. I think it's great pre-training, particularly for those longer training sessions. Obviously, a vasodilator, right? Provide more oxygen to muscles, and if you can find an NSF or third-party tested product, I think it's a great supplement.
Yeah, I so in my last year of university, we were doing we were just fucking around really. It was just a massive muck about. But we essentially did incremental test on the bike, and then we put that bike in a heat chamber and see how different things impact how your body deals with heat. One was ice towels, and which I kind of spoke to Heather about, which was fascinating. But we also implemented beetroot, and it was quite weird if you forget about it. It's weird if you forget about it, but it actually did. Well, at least me, it helped me a little bit, like get an extra minute or two on my bike test. So I've always been interested in like what is used and how it's used in different sports.
Yeah. I mean, some athletes use it, and they see great benefits. I think it's more of a taste, I think,
Yeah,
more than anything. Some people just can't get over the taste, but I think it's a very effective supplement. Now combine that with beta alanine and potentially, and you have like some very, very great, performance development agents right there, right? And
aka rocket fuel.
aka rocket fuel, right? But no, there's a whole bunch of supplements that can really have a positive
Mm.
benefit on
What's
on
one that you recommend for just that little extra squeeze in performance? Again, I know it's very individual, but like, what's something that you've been kind of looking into that you're like, so far, this looks amazing.
I so cliche, but creatine, right? I know, but if you want me to go with something a little bit more, I don't want to say novel, but exciting, um, probably, this is not even that exciting. I was gonna say beta alanine, but with constant supplementation, I think people think that the actual prickling sensation is what
Mm.
actually gives you that boost, but it's actually the constant supplementation, and it's actually quite a lot that you need to actually reach the recommended dosage, right? Which ends up being about 4 to 6 grams per day.
Wow.
But if you consistently supplement it at about the 30-day mark is when you actually saturate your muscles and actually have that benefit of buffering that lactic acid accumulation. And then you get those
Cool.
endurance benefits.
That's interesting. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like as a strength program, when you're only seeing results after that 3 to 4 weeks, you're actually saying that after, again, it's most like most supplements. If you're in colder countries, vitamin D will only start taking effect after 30 days,
Yep.
XYZ. That's interesting.
Yep. I mean, even as simple as carbohydrate powders or pre-training carbohydrates in the MMA population when they're in a calorie restriction state, right? Periodizing those carbohydrates
Mm.
go a long way as well. And it's funny because sometimes, carbohydrate powders or, carbohydrate gels or whatever will get marketed as like pre-training or, fuel or whatnot, which is exactly what it is. But when you're training is when they go the furthest, right?
Mm.
Or when you're in a calorie restricted state, right? Is when they go the furthest. I remember when I was in college and off season, and I'd be like, I want to get a good workout. I'm going to try this, see if it works. And I'd be like, it doesn't work. Well, of course, I was eating whatever, I wanted, and my glycogen stores were completely full. So it was like, all right, that's just me do nothing because I'm already oxidizing quite a bit of glycogen at the same rate. So
Hmm. No, I think that's important to touch on as well. It's like if your body's already got a lot of that one thing, it's just going to pee out.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean that goes for so many things, right? B vitamins, I think, is the one that comes to the top of my head, but
Be-
body's pretty good at regulating excess stores.
I'll tell you a funny story. When I was at the height of my judo career, I looked at bulk powder for supplements, and they've got like this. It's like their Pro Series supplements. So you take a tablet in the morning that has all your vitamins like that you need in the morning, and then you take one at nighttime that's got like all your nighttime vitamins. Um, Now at this point, I didn't know what B12 was, but it was very high in B12. Sick. I need B12. Cool. No one told me that it would pretty much my pee would be neon green if I didn't have enough
Yeah,
water. So like the first couple of days I took, I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like I booked a doctor's appointment, I booked everything. They're like, is anything changed? They're like, I mean, yeah, like I'm taking supplements, I'm doing like all the right things. I don't know why this is happening. It's like, what supplements are you taking? So I showed them. He's like, yeah, you're taking a lot of B.
yeah. I think if you're in the sports world, no matter what discipline you are, you have at least one story like that, right? Where it's like, oh my God, it's like, why is my pee this color? And am I dying?
Yeah. Which, funnily enough, after the beetroot, I've completely forgot about it.
Yeah.
And then my P's and back end passages as well was it was scary.
Yeah. Yep. I've been there as well. Been there as well.
What's some low hanging fruit that you drum into your athletes?
Establishing a solid nutrition foundation, right? And how does that look like? Essentially, if you are, because typically we're talking about weight descents, right? In combat sports, trying to engage in no more than 1% weight loss per week of body weight leading up to the weigh-in is probably the best, the lowest hanging fruit, right? With that, we can work backwards and ensure that we have enough protein to not lose any muscle mass, so 2 to 2.5 grams per kg per day, and then from there on out, ensuring that there's enough carbohydrates to fuel the training sessions. I think just those three, having vegetables, fiber, right? Just those three, four at this stage will go ahead and set up the athlete for success.
Nice. What is some piece of advice that you would give again people that want to go into nutrition and develop themselves, and on the back of that, some strength and conditioning coaches or practitioners who have athletes and what small wins they can get with their athletes?
I'd say, stay up to date with literature. That's probably not the lowest hanging fruit, but I think once you do get pretty assimilated with how to read research, I mean, it just helps out tremendously. Now, we do have our certification as part of the UFC Performance Institute, level 1, 2, and 3, which, helps out tremendously. It's the level 3 in particular ends up being a more MMA specific type of education material. Those are two not low hanging fruits. Like I said, low hanging fruits when it comes to word of advice, I'd say probably get to know your athlete and meet them in the middle. That's probably my biggest takeaway, especially if you're trying to actually have the furthest impact, right? Sometimes it's okay to not have everything go perfect and just kind of check something have a box unchecked and wait until the next camp to check that box.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Glenn, for coming on and diving a little bit deeper than what we got last time. It was awesome having you on again.
Absolutely, Manny. Thank you for having me. It's always fun, chatting all things, MMA and
Sports
nutrition here and
performance.
sports performance.
Perfect. Peace.